Okay, so what happened was Layla Akbar and I were going through the Bonatti by ourselves, and we came across this consideration. And it really, and I couldn't figure out what it was talking about. I couldn't figure out what it was, and so she and I were just kind of going over it, and it made no sense. So I'm going to read it out, and then I'm going to talk about what made no sense. 20th consideration is that you look to see if the moon or a significator is joined to one of those planets, because then it signifies that it is going to be, right? So a planet that's joined to another planet, that represents perfection of some type, and that means something is going to be. Whence you must consider whether he to whom the moon or the significator is joined receives the significator or the moon, for then it signifies the full completion and perfection of the matter. That makes sense, and it's good and praiseworthy in. Okay, I say this if the receiver were a benefic. If, however, it did not receive, okay, so that's at planet B. So we're talking about planet A who's applying to planet B, and planet B is a benefic who receives planet A. That's the first part. Now he says, if, however, planet B does not receive, and the moon or the lord of, or the significator of the matter were to commit disposition to it, nevertheless, however, it will be perfected. This is where I started to get confused. But if it were a malefic, even if the moon or the significator commits disposition to it and reception did not intervene, now I'm fully confused. It will not be perfected, and evil and detriment will be introduced into their sides. So this is what really got me. This is what got me, was this particular thing. How can the moon commit disposition, and how can there be a commitment of disposition and not be any reception? Right? So the significator commits disposition, but there's no reception. Like what was the difference? What was the actual true difference between receiving something and committing disposition to something? And so I tried winging it a little bit, and then I just realized that I had no fucking idea what it was, what it really meant, what the distinction was really about. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to come back to this, and I'm going to figure this out, and we're going to come back to it. And so I thought, when I decided to do this, I decided to do on reception a few weeks ago. And I thought, oh, you know what I do on reception this time, I'm going to start with this issue because it is actually quite important. So reception involves something, a planet who receives and a planet who commits disposition. So this became a clue. Remember that reception proper is not the same as receiving a disposition, which is pushed to a planet. Now, when we use this term pushing, when we were talking about this with Bonatti, we also, one of the things that Benjamin Dykes also says is that only applying planets can push. But in this particular instance, I'm going to say that this is not what he means. So,
Garth, really, before you continue, I mean, I understand what reception is, but can you just define reception for the beginning of this talk?
Oh, good question.
I just want to, like, I think it'd be good.
Let me actually come to the actual, here we go. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a good idea. Okay. So here we have our definition of reception. So basically, thank you. Reception is when planet A is applying to planet B, and planet A is either in the sign of planet B, or planet B is in the sign of planet A, or planet A is in their own sign and applying to planet B. Those are the three main ways that reception can happen. So essentially, reception is a network of associations based on essential dignity, which is why you want to have memorized exactly who is in what sign, or rather who owns what sign, right? So if I have Venus in Libra or Venus in Aries applying to the sun in Gemini, then which actually kind of can't happen, but or it might just be able to happen. But let's just hypothetically, right? She can only be 47 degrees away, so she can't really be 60 degrees away. So let's just say that were possible. That would be Venus would then, the sun would then be receiving Venus from his exaltation. And actually, I was actually kind of going to get to this distinction, Christopher, with this, because I don't feel like this definition of reception, this kind of general definition of reception, is really enough, which is, okay, when this planet is in this other planet's sign, that's the general, but what does it actually mean for a planet to receive? And then what does it mean? Because the other side of reception is the commitment of disposition. So reception then, okay, so I guess this particular way that we can now start looking at reception is that reception is made up of two particular issues. One is the planet who receives another planet and what that means, and what we're going to kind of go into what that actually looks like, and then what it means for a planet to commit their disposition, which then goes back to where we started. All right, so let's go back. So what happened, so as I said, I got freaked out, didn't know what, well, not freaked out, but I didn't know what it was talking about. So we can come back to Benjamin Dykes now that we have a good working definition of reception. Thank you, Christopher. Remember that reception proper is not the same as receiving a disposition, which is pushed to a planet, but inherent in the concept of reception is receiving a disposition. So let's look at what receiving a disposition is. Now, we just looked at what reception is, right? So let's look at what receiving a disposition is supposed to be. So this is from Mashallah. Mashallah actually wrote a book called On Reception. And so I didn't find it to be quite as useful as I was hoping it would be, but I found some good things. This part, he basically just talks about what actually creates a conjunction. And a conjunction, of course, as we know, is any applying aspect, right? It's not, a conjunction is any applying aspect. It doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the bodily conjunction when we think of the word conjunction. So likewise, and this also, he talks about commitment of disposition. The rest of the 7 planets, whichever one of them were joined to its associate from its domicile or exaltation in the known aspects, right? Those are the Ptolemaic aspects, or in one of the signs, and it projected or committed its disposition. So there is one of our first ideas of this committing of this, or this commitment of disposition. If the one to whom it committed receives the disposition, it will perfect the matter by the command of God. So what this person, what Mashallah has just said is that if planet A is in either his own domicile, right? We're joined to its associate from its domicile. So it was joined to its associate from the associate's domicile. So planet A is in Gemini, applying to Mercury, right? So Mercury would have to be the planet B for that to be working. Or planet A is in Aries and applying to the sun, right? Which is the exaltation ruler of Aries. So that's basically what he's talking about. So if planet A were in some sign that's owned by some planet and also applying to that planet, and it projected or committed its disposition, that's planet A it's talking about. So that's how we know about pushing. So remember what Ben Dykes just said was reception proper is not the same as receiving a disposition, which is pushed to a planet. So what Mashallah is saying is that planet A, as a result of being in planet B's domicile or exaltation, commits its disposition. And then, but that the planet B has to actually receive the disposition, which implies something which I had overlooked. It implies that there's a way to commit disposition without reception. Remember, that's what made me stumble. That's what got me all freaked out. I couldn't figure out how this was necessarily possible. So this made me kind of go on this journey of trying to figure out what the hell does commitment of disposition mean? What are we talking about? Okay, so in this particular case, he's talking about something that we're going to come to know as pushing nature, which is when planet A is in the domicile or exaltation of planet B and is aspecting them, and as a result, commits their disposition to planet B, who then receives it. Okay, so that is, yes.
So really quickly, just to be like absolutely totally clear, that definition makes sense. So just to give another example, like say planet A is in its own domicile or exaltation.
That's a different type. We're going to get to it. That's a different type. So there's three different types of pushing, right? And so I just kind of got ahead of myself by naming it. But yes, that's a different type, and I will get to it.
Cool.
Good question, but I'll definitely get there. Let me get there. Okay, so that's the first type, because like I said, there's more than one way that this can happen. Okay, and then know that the conjunction comes to be in this way. Okay, so this is when he says the light one is joined to a heavy one, blah, blah, blah. And then they are joined from degree to degree, and the light one commits its own disposition to the heavy one. Okay, so this goes right along with what Benjamin Dykes was saying, which is that the lighter planet, the pushing planet is always the applying planet, right? The light one. The light planet, which is the applying planet, is always pushing the disposition onto the other planet, who then would receive it. After then it's separated, it's not aspecting from the aspect, but a conjunction. Okay, boom. Okay, so that so far is what Mashallah says about commitment of disposition. A conjunction is an aspect, but however long a planet we're going to another planet, it will aspect with its own light and own nature until it projects its own light upon it from degree by degree. Then it will be a true conjunction, and the light one will commit its own matter to the other. All right, so this is pretty much what Mashallah is saying. Now, Bonatti is saying something a little bit different. Now remember that Bonatti is essentially the assembler of all of the Arabic and Persian knowledge that goes before him, right? Everything that he writes is so-and-so says this, Al-Kabizi says this, Al-Naragar says this, Abu Mashar says this. It's all, and every now and then he says, well, Valence or Vedius says this, Vedius Valence, who's a Greek astrologer from, Alexandria, but ultimately he's almost always dealing with these medievalists, so from the same time period. So now he's saying if some planet is joined with the Lord of the sign in which it is, right, which is the exact same type, which is the pushing nature type, or with the Lord of the exaltation of the same sign, right, whether by body or by aspect, that the planet who is the Lord of the sign, right, planet B, commits and gives its own disposition and nature and virtue to it. That's the exact opposite, right? So we just had Mashallah say the light planet commits the light planet is the one that commits it. Now we have Bonatti saying that it's the Lord of the sign who commits his disposition and nature to it, right? So that would be planet B. That would be the heavier planet if I'm reading that correctly. Does anybody think I'm not reading that correctly? Right, okay. So that's what it looks like, right? Okay. And so then he gives two examples. So the moon's in the 3rd degree of Aries and Mars is in the 8th degree of Gemini. So the moon was being received by Mars by aspect, and he was receiving her from his own domicile and committed to her his own virtue and disposition. Okay, that confirms what we just read. And then the next one is, now this one is a little bit different. This is actually what you're talking about, Christopher. If a planet is in its own dignity, such a dignity of its own, that another planet had a dignity there, and we're joined to him in it, he will give him his own strength, so that he to whom he is joined, remember, they use the word joined, they mean they're applying, has the strength or nature of both. For instance, Jupiter was in the 9th degree of Aries, and Mars was in the 5th degree. So Mars is joined to Jupiter, right? Mars is applying, and he commits his strength and disposition to Jupiter. Now we have the lighter planet committing strength and disposition. Now, are we fully confused about what this commitment of disposition thing is? Because this is where I wanted us to get. It's like, what the fuck is it, right? So now Mars is committing his disposition to Jupiter. Jupiter's got the dignity of triplicity. It's nighttime, I guess. Mars is in Aries, and so he's committing his disposition to him, whereas he just said that Jupiter would be the one to commit the disposition to the other. But of course, the difference is that in the other example, planet A is in the sign of Jupiter. Let's say it's Mars in Sagittarius applying to Jupiter in Pisces, right? And so in that particular case, Jupiter would then commit his disposition to Mars. In this case, Mars is in his own sign, and Mars commits his disposition to Jupiter. So what the hell is going on? And what the hell did Bonatti mean? Right, let's come back. So once again, Ben Dyke says reception proper is not the same as receiving a disposition which is pushed to a planet. If it's pushed to a planet, it's being pushed by the applier. Then all of a sudden I realized something. I forgot that there doesn't have to be any kind of reception for a commitment of disposition. This is actually called pushing. Pushing management is called pulsatio dispositionis, pushing of disposition, or he says arrangement, but that's dispositionis is where we get the term disposition. So, however, the pushing of arrangement is if a planet would be joined to a planet in whatever way, and it would push its own arrangement to it. Now, we're going to talk about what that means, which if it were from the sextile trine aspect, there were reception between them. See, there doesn't have to be reception for there to be pushing management. Then pushing itself will be with concord. But if it were from a conjunction and there were a complexion between them, it will even be from concord. Now he's talking about the bodily conjunction. And if it were to the contrary, or what we have said, the pushing of arrangement will be without concord. So what's the arrangement that's being pushed? The arrangement that's being pushed, okay, so pushing management does not require any kind of dignity relationship. In other words, pushing management takes place in every connection, although its import might be overshadowed by the special effects by nature, by pushing nature and power, which we're going to talk about. And when there are no dignities involved, it is the only thing which happens. Basically, the management that is pushed is the management of the house rulership, of the houses that are ruled by the planet. So let me just go backwards here for 1 second. Right, so it will push its arrangement. Every planet has an arrangement based on the houses it rules. So let's say you have Virgo rising, and you've got Mercury applying to Jupiter, right? That's the ruler of the 1st and the 7th by square, but with reception. So what pushing management would then mean is that Mercury is pushing the 1st house onto the 7th house, onto Jupiter as a result of that. So pushing management is basically the way that we look at charts consistently in in traditional Western. When we look at a chart and we say, oh, the ruler of the 7th is in the 1st, that's a type of pushing arrangement. Or when we say the ruler of the 4th is trining the ruler of the 5th, that's a type of pushing management. That happens every time planets are in any kind of conjunction. And so going back to what Bonatti asked or said earlier, which was if it were malefic, even if the moon or the significator commits disposition to it and reception did not intervene, it will not be perfected. And I needed to understand, well, what does it mean to commit disposition? Or what does it mean to, what's the difference? So ultimately, committing disposition is, we should pretty much, I think, go with what Mashallah is saying, although Bonatti makes sense too, doesn't he? Because what he's saying is that the planet who rules the sign that the other planet is in takes over and gives its disposition. But we know that from the terminology, which we're going to learn in a second, that it's actually the other way around, or it should be the other way around, or that's something that we should be looking at. So we came here to reception. Thank you, Christopher, for kind of bringing us to our thesis from which to grow, from which to move. and now here we are talking about pushing. So the planets receive each other by aspect without a conjunction, but the reception of the conjunction is stronger. Okay, so conjunction is always considered, bodily conjunction is always considered stronger than aspect. namely if each one of the planets were unified in a trine or sextile aspect of the other, or in two signs of equal ascension. He's talking about Antisha here, or whose length by day were one and the same, that's Antisha, or in two signs which belong to one planet. So he's basically talking about the different ways that planets can receive each other. So they can receive each other by aspect, they can receive each other by, let's see, unified in a trine or sextile aspect of the other, or in two signs of equal ascension or whose length of day, so by Antisha, or in two signs which belong to one planet. So let's say you've got Mercury, Mars and Jupiter in Sagittarius and Pisces, right? That would be a kind of reception. For each of them receives its companion through the concord of the nature of these signs. So all of a sudden it's gotten a little bit bigger. We're really only going to deal with the kind of reception that I just defined, which is reception that involves pushing based on domicile or exaltation. And this whole pushing is called reception. That's why I put this here. And if a received planet were a fortune, its strength is augmented. But if a bad one, it will be diminished from its evil. But if from the category of mutual reception of significator to the other, it signifies the appearance of the unexpected thing. So mutual reception, we're going to talk about in a second. And then look at this, from the category of generosity, it signifies the querent and sought thing are esteeming each other. Now, generosity means when when two planets are in each other's sign that do not aspect each other. So Venus in Aries and Mars in Taurus, or Venus in Scorpio, Mars in Libra, right? Or Moon in Gemini, Mercury in Cancer. Right, so those are called generosities. They are not considered true receptions. In order for there to be an actual reception, there needs to, well, the strongest reception. Matter of fact, I think it's coming up next. Oh, okay, wait, that's pushing nature. Oh wait, here we go. Okay, so the strongest type of reception is by applying aspect. The next strongest is a separating aspect. Then the next strongest is by whole sign, but preferably by trine or sextile, right? So you have Sun in Gemini, Mercury in Leo, but not in an actual aspect. But the sextile makes that work. Or you have Mars in Leo, Sun in Aries, right? And so, but they're not in aspect to each other. They're not actually applying. They're, like Mars is at 0, the Sun is at 27, right? They're still in a reception. It's just the weakest kind. If you have Mars, you have the Sun in Virgo and Mercury in Leo, then you have a generosity. Okay, so these are the two types of pushing nature. Well, pushing nature is the classic reception. Planet A is in the sign or exaltation of planet B and applies to planet B. Like here, Venus is 10 Sagittarius, applying to Jupiter at 13 Aquarius. Then there is the reverse reception, which is when planet B is in the sign of planet A. So planet A applies to planet B, who is in the sign of planet A. So here we have Venus is at 10 degrees of Sagittarius, applying to Mars at 12 Libra, right? So in the first example, Venus is in the domicile of planet B. In the second example, planet B is in the domicile of Venus. So planet B, the first reception would be called pushing nature, and the second would be called a blah, blah, blah with reception. In this case, it would be a sextile with reception. So these are the two classic types of reception, pushing nature and reverse reception. Now we come to Christopher's question, which is about what do you call it, or what do you talk about? What happens when you have a planet that's in its own sign and it's applying to another planet? That is called pushing power. And see, look at how it's even Hermann calls it the gift of virtue, pushing strength, the gift of power, right? So that even once again implies that the planet committing the disposition is actually the lighter planet, and especially when we have pushing power. And so actually what happened, what we saw with Bonatti is that in the first example, Bonatti believes that planet B commits disposition to planet A. In the second example, Bonatti would believe that planet A would be pushing to planet B, especially if Venus were in her own sign, right? So if Venus were in Taurus and applying to the moon, right, who has exaltation in Taurus, then that would be considered pushing power. We're going to look at all of this with charts in a second, but that would be considered pushing power, and Venus would be, well, of course, Venus can apply to the moon, so never mind. Never mind. So, but that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out. But Bonatti is making sense, but he is departing from the medieval Islamics. So that we will say that. So, yes, Christopher.
And in the example where planet A is in its own domicile, how would it be regarded if that was flipped, where if planet A was applying to planet B and planet B was in its own domicile?
Oh, then that's a good question. Okay, so the law or the general rule is that planets that are in their own signs or exaltations receive all comers.
I see.
So this is why this issue of pushing and commitment of disposition, that I'm bringing it up, because there seems to be all kinds of ideas of ways of understanding this, and I don't know that it necessarily can be one that we can really think of it in just one way, because I came up when I started learning this, I had come from the understanding that a planet that's in its own sign receives everybody. But now it's looking like, oh wait, it's receiving if this is this is what the actual receiving is. And mind you, I think most of this went out of style by the 15th century, the 16th century. So we're really kind of reviving something. And the reason I'm reviving it is because I really do think that not all aspects are equal, and that aspects with reception are less malefic. Like a square with reception is less malefic. An opposition with reception is less malefic. And a trine without reception is less benefic. That's kind of my point in this. And so that comes here to this power of reception thing. The first and the most important thing that reception does is guarantee perfection of a matter. So if those of you who remember when we were working with Bonatti, this all comes from consideration 4, which was all about things that make things happen. What actually makes things happen in a chart? What makes things come to be or not in a chart? And so reception was one of those 16 things that you looked for to see if something was going to happen. And so reception guarantees perfection. This is not so only for the final dispositor of the matter, but for any of the planets which must push management, there's that term, over the matter from one to another. This is from Ben Dykes, right? So he's saying if there's a translation of light and there's a third planet involved and they're translating between one and the other, it will involve that in the perfection of the matter. If they receive each other, they help ensure the integrity and success of the matter. So if they receive each other, if there is reception, then you can pretty much guarantee things should work. Received benefics produce a stronger good. Received malefics impede less. Reception takes away the evil from a situation so that a planet's signification will not suffer, even if it's in a bad place. So this comes back to your question, Christopher, which is around, hey, so if something's applying to a planet and it's in its own sign or exaltation, I think that this third bullet point is what we're looking at. Reception takes away the evil from a situation. If a planet is in a good place, right? If the planet is in its own sign or exaltation, then it can produce, it cannot just produce, it can also produce a certain amount of largesse and protection for other planets, or aegis under which the other planet can operate. So, for instance, if let's say you're saying the moon is in Aries and she's applying to Jupiter in Sagittarius, right? So it's not necessarily that there's a reception as a result of the signs exchanging, right? Venus is not in Jupiter's sign, Jupiter is not in the moon sign, but Jupiter is strong, and thus he can receive anybody he comes into contact with. So there's a commitment of disposition. In this particular case, obviously the moon would push her management, right? Because pushing planets will always push management. They'll always commit that disposition. They'll always commit the disposition of, hey, I'm working with this house. Now you get to work with it too.
Makes a lot of sense. I've been curious about that.
Okay, but then Jupiter will say, but and hey, look, I'm in really good condition, so I'm going to help you with that house a lot this time, right? As opposed to when she applies to Jupiter and he's retrograde in Capricorn from Aries, right? And he's retrograde, so he returns the disposition, right? Remember, that's where I'm so obsessed with this whole thing of returning a virtue. He returns it. He says, oh, sorry, bitch, I can't. I don't have the strength. I'm too old. You see this cane, you see I can't do it. I just can't. I'm too caught up. You're gonna have to take care of it on your own. So that's the difference between when a planet is in good condition. It can't receive the virtue. So there's a different type of reception. So it's like all of these little fucking layers of reception are kind of showing themselves, right? There's this other kind of reception that when a planet is good and it's being applied to, it can help out. It can do everything. It can help you do everything you need to do. Or if a planet is in fucked up condition and it can't receive anything and it returns it. So all of this, we need to do this with charts. So I think I'm almost done with all the speaking part. Pushing nature impresses, pushing nature impresses the natural features of the pushing planet. Okay, so remember that's when planet A is in the sign of planet B and applying. So let's say we were talking about the moon is in Sagittarius and Jupiter is in Aries. So then in this case, pushing nature, the moon would impress her natural features of the pushing planet, of her natural features onto it. So there wouldn't be, but Benatti says the opposite. He says, well, no, Jupiter's going to push his disposition onto the moon. I don't see why it couldn't be both. Pushing power, let's say now we've got the moon in Cancer applying to Jupiter in Taurus. That's a mutual reception, but it's got pushing power. So pushing power impresses its capability and authority, which makes perfect sense. And Christopher, I think that goes also for when the planet is being applied to. So if the planet's being applied to from another planet and in its own sign, it's in its own sign or exaltation, it has the capability and authority to help out. And so I think that there probably is a commitment of disposition in that case. Pushing management impresses the rulership duties of the pusher. So once again, if the moon's in Aries and Jupiter's in Sagittarius and it's Cancer rising, so then the moon is pushing the first house at Jupiter, who is the ruler of the fifth, or the ninth by Pisces, right? So that kind of thing. So that's where kind of we get into what the pushing is about. And then, as I said, reception by whole sign. So the connection should be by trine or sextile. All perfect receptions involve applying aspects. Weak receptions by whole signs in trine and sextile relationships are to be considered. Okay, so you can look at whole sign receptions, mutual receptions, etc., but preferably sextile trine.
And does that only apply when you're looking at a chart using whole sign houses, or do the house systems kind of are ignored?
Yeah, you can ignore them. I don't think it really matters. I want to use this chart, Holistic Star 61, to start with, because I remember I was using this chart for a lot of things, and it was a great example of, it was an example of almost everything. So pushing nature, what we'd be looking for is a planet who's in the sign of planet, the first planet A is in the sign of planet B and is in the sign of planet B and is applying. So let's see if we've got that. I thought we had that here. Let's see. So we've got okay, yes, we do. So here's the Saturn the sun rather at 14 degrees of Capricorn. And here's Saturn, who's the ruler of Capricorn, at 19 degrees of Pisces. sun is applying to Saturn by sextile. The sun is in the sign of Saturn. This is pushing nature. Okay? So that's pushing nature. In which case, mashallah and Al-Kabizi would say that the sun would push its nature onto Saturn. It would commit its disposition onto Saturn. What Bonatti would say is that Saturn would push his disposition onto the sun. Now, guess what? I have this exact sextile in my chart. It's applying. It's one of the two applying aspects in my chart. The sun is the ruler of the sun is the ruler of the whole sign ninth house, and of the eighth house by interception and the whole sign ninth house. It's in the first. The sun and Saturn is the ruler is in the third house and is the ruler of the third and fourth, or the second and third. And so one of the things about I'm an astrologer. I'm really into astrology and into divination. And of course, the sun is divination and that kind of thing. And then so is the ninth house. And I've always been very interested in older texts, difficult language, things that go back to the ancient world. Saturn is the ancient world, as well as the eighth house, which the sun is the ruler of. So I think that there's actually a mutual commitment of disposition happening. My Saturn is not being especially dark, it's being more solar, and my sun is being very, very Saturnian and to the letter and disciplined. I remember when I first started learning tarot, my teacher said, Antoine is so meticulous, so detailed, so, and it was all about that. And so much, even just think of the way that we're dealing with this, all the detail, the wading through all the difficulty. That's the sun Saturn. And so what are we saying then? Is it my sun that's pushing it to my Saturn, or is it the Saturn that's pushing it to the sun? I'd say maybe it could be both. Why couldn't it be both? So something to be looking at. All right. So I forgot that she even had the exact same sextile. Okay. And indeed, there is pushing power also in this chart. The moon is in Cancer, which is her own sign, and she's applying to Saturn in Pisces. And so she is pushing power onto Saturn. So this Saturn is receiving quite a bit of virtue. And so Saturn is the ruler of the third and the second by interception. So it'd be third and fourth by whole sign. But so Saturn is receiving quite a bit of light and light from the lights. Look, he's receiving it from both lights, the light of the time. The moon is in her highs, even, she's above the horizon. She's in a female sign by night. And then you've got the sun also. So this moon is very, very kind of strong, really a good, strong light for this chart. So I'm not really trying to give too much interpretation, but so let's talk about management for a second. So we know that Saturn rules the third and the fourth, or the second and the third, right? So it's second and third by this chart. And also that Saturn is in the fourth. So with the sun applying to Saturn, the sun, by pushing management, is going to push the ninth house onto this Saturn. And the moon, by pushing management, is pushing the eighth house onto this Saturn. Now, who's the ruler part of fortune? The Venus is the ruler part of fortune. So Saturn doesn't have that. Saturn doesn't have the ascendant, but somehow this third house and the second house do. So the third house is siblings and family, and siblings and and relatives or friends that are like family. So there could be that influence of the ninth and the eighth house could come to this person via close friends or siblings. This person is obviously interested in astrology because I got their chart from Reddit, from the astrology subreddits, and they're part of my astrology study. And look, their name is Holistic Star, right? Holistic, Holistic Star, holistic, that involves, that kind of implies the ninth house, right? And the ninth house is ruled by the sun. So we've already got how the sun is pushing Saturn. But see, the sun is pushing Saturn to him. See, that's how I came to understand it. But that pushing nature meant that the planet, the lighter planet, in this case the sun, pushed both its nature and the planet's nature to it, right? Saturn's nature and the sun's nature, because he's in Saturn's sign. But Bonatti is saying, no, planet B commits his nature to the sun. They both make sense. In my opinion, it both makes perfect sense. Whereas with pushing power, which we have with this particular chart, or this particular configuration, it's the moon that pushes its, what did he call it? He said that it was pushing its ability, or its competency or ability or something of that nature to it, which I thought was really useful. Pushing nature. Yeah, impresses its capability and authority, right? So in this case, the sun would be pushing both his nature and Saturn's nature to Saturn, whereas in this case, the moon is pushing her full capability at Saturn. So that would be the difference, or even the Bonatti difference, which would be as a result of the sun being in Saturn's sign, Saturn would push his disposition onto the sun and make the sun more Saturnian. I'd certainly say that's kind of an issue with, that's certainly a part of the situation for me. But it also makes the Saturn more solar. It also makes the Saturn more solar too. So it's both. It's definitely both. If you all want to do the IMGUR link thing and look for and put your chart in for looking at receptions, I was just going to go through a bunch of different charts and just see if we can see any, if we can recognize any. Let's see. Oh, great. There's Diana. Perfect. And we'll look for that in a second. Okay, I'm going to look at this other chart first for a second. This is Kathleen Battle. Kathleen Battle was at the time that she was at her most famous, was considered the most hated person in classical music. She was one of the worst people, one of the absolute worst people. Everybody hated working with her. People complained about her. As a matter of fact, she was, when she was, okay, thank you, Anne-Louise. Last name's doing that thing. Oh, Battle, yes, indeed it is, isn't it? What's interesting about this is that they even said that, speaking of last names doing that thing, at San Francisco Opera. So in 1994, she was basically fired from the Met. She was already kind of deteriorating vocally, and she had just gotten too outrageous, and she did something, and they were like, fine, bitch, go, get the fuck out, we hate you. And then she came to San Francisco right after that. I had just moved there. And I remember that there were people that had these T-shirts that said, I survived the battle. And so that's kind of the reputation. She had this horrible, horrible reputation for just being a horrible, horrible person. Narcissistic, mean, unreasonable. I mean, just horrible, just really, really horrible. So one of the things that we see that she had this horrible reputation, and look at how the part of fortune is in the 10th house of reputation, and then look at how the ruler of the 10th, and which is reputation, and the part of fortune, which is in the house of reputation, is with Mercury. And now one of the things that Saturn has a reputation for is being a killjoy. Saturn is a killjoy. He's used to being a total fucking killjoy. And so, I was doing a reading for somebody. I don't know if any of you were there when we were talking about like the different ways. It was when we were looking at the Rahu and Ketu versus the Mercury Moon wave for looking at soul. And I was looking at Ted Bundy, and we were talking about how the Saturn in Leo, when it's either around the Ascendant or the part of fortune, or or with the ruler of the Ascendant, represents misanthropy. There's a misanthropic aspect. There's a people-hating aspect to the Saturn in Leo, and a superiority, a sense of superiority, as a result of a sense of superiority. So everybody is a subject. Everybody is, you end up subjecting people to you. Hitler had Leo, had Saturn in Leo in the 10th house. Matter of fact, we've got the Hitler chart, so we can maybe look at that to see if there's any receptions. So receptions, what kind of receptions would we have going on here? The main one, the first big one that I see, is that the sun is in his own sign, and he's applying to Saturn. And so the sun is then pushing power at Saturn. And as a result, what's happening now, remember how they were just saying, it doesn't matter which planets are involved either. So what we've also got here is we have Mercury in between them, right? Sun is at 20, Saturn is at 25, Mercury's at 21. That means Mercury is translating the light from the sun to Saturn. Sun is pride. This woman was prideful and arrogant and mean and vicious and cruel. These are the choleric, hot and dry signs, so they can be argumentative. She was argumentative and bitchy and just horrible, horrible, horrible person. But what I thought was also so interesting is look over here, this Jupiter, the seventh, and I thought, ooh, this person is fake sweet to the public, right? The seventh house is the house of the public. And sure enough, when I was reading about them, people marveled at how sweet and wonderful she was to her fans. People would come backstage and she would immediately put on this. And even the persona that she would put on was this kind of butter won't melt in my mouth, totally sweet, kind of virginal, because she was even very youthful and she's very Mercury looking. So very like a very young girl, ingenue, very youthful, Mercury looking. So right, Mercury rules the Gemini rising, childlike, youthful, and the voice was very youthful, the highest like a coloratura type, so and very kind of pure and small and boyish, piping and boyish even. And so we've got the Mercury as the ruler of the Gemini, but so we have the Mercury, the ruler of the Ascendant, applying, kind of translating this heat between these two malefics. At this point, the sun is malefic, and the sun is the ruler of the fourth and the third. And she was raised in the church singing, and her father really pushed her into singing. So something's going on, something not so good going on with the father around this. But so that's an example of a pushing power. And then here we've got, at some point when the moon will actually apply to the Jupiter, that could become pushing nature, right? But until then, really the moon's next application is to this Mars. So there's not really anything going on that way. Venus is applying to Mars widely, but not in any good way. Although, okay, so Venus is in Cancer, which is we haven't talked about that, which is there is positive reception, right? So when we've been talking about reception, we've just been talking about positive reception. There's also negative reception. So for instance, if Venus is not quite close enough to be in application to Mars, but when she's going to be pushing his fall at him. And he's already in detriment. So even though she's going to be receiving him, okay, so this will be a square with reception for Venus because Mars is in her sign. However, Mars is in detriment and then is receiving fall from Venus. So that's not really very useful for love in this chart. That wouldn't be the most useful thing, or for interrelationships of any kind. It could be difficult. So the Venus-Mars opposition, but it could certainly make a more argumentative, once again, bringing more of this argumentative style. And even with once again, the moon's next application is to Mars, right? So this is already a battle, right? Like you said, there's the last name doing their thing. Let's look at some of you for a second here, and then we'll come back to some of these others. I've got all kinds of people I thought we would look at. Okay, so we're looking at Diana, and well, the first thing we have, okay, we've got some planets in their own signs. We've got, let's see. Well, first of all, what's the planet?
I guess my question.
Yeah, that's your question.
Because I'm really interested in this Mars Jupiter thing right now, is that Jupiter is in Aries, so he's in Mars sign.
Yes.
But it's a Jupiter retrograde, so does that change? And so I looked at the ephemeris, and Mars is going to overtake Jupiter. So I guess Jupiter is moving towards Mars.
Yes, Jupiter is moving towards Mars. Jupiter is applying.
And get this,
Yeah.
Mars is going to overtake Jupiter on a Tuesday.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love it. But yeah, Mars is applying to Jupiter. Mars is applying to Jupiter. Period. So yes, this chart includes a lot of fun things. So this opposition would be considered a return of virtue.
Okay.
But it would be considered a return of virtue with fitness because it's with reception. So Jupiter is retrograde, so he's going to return Mars's virtue. And so once again, when we think about return of virtue, which is when a planet is either combust, when planet B, the planet being applied to, is either combust or retrograde, and it says, no, I can't receive your disposition, you take it back. So that's already, so once again, that confirms what we were already thinking, or what Mashallah and Al-Kabizi were saying, which is, hey, it's the light planet that commits the disposition, right? Not what Bonatti was saying. In this case, even though they are both in, now, if there weren't a reception, it would be considered a return of virtue with detriment, because they're both in Caden houses. But because there's a reception, because Mars is receiving Jupiter, this is an opposition with reception. This is not pushing nature. Mars isn't pushing Jupiter's nature at him. Jupiter is in Mars's sign. So because there's a reception, this would be considered return with fitness. But returns of virtue already kind of show a difficulty with establishing the connection of the oh, great, Christopher, thank you. Establishing the connection of the aspect itself, right? Mars casts his light out and says, hey, help me. And the other planet says, oh, fuck, sorry. You're shit out of luck, dude. Can't. Take it back and do it yourself. And in this case, can they? Right. And so that's what return of virtue with fitness or detriment implies. Can they? Can they not? That's why you need to go into meditation with Jupiter and Mars and ask them about this karma.
Okay. Thanks.
You really need to go into and ask them about this karma, because it could be a return with detriment, in which case, so there is a pushing nature though in this chart. Mars is at, now technically there is, but then I was just from reading the Mashallah and preparing this, Mashallah is really specific about the fact that only the planet that immediately you're going to is the planet that you should pay the attention to. So for instance, notice that Jupiter is at 19 degrees and 24 minutes. Saturn is at 19 degrees and 28 minutes. So Mars is actually applying first to the Jupiter and then to the Saturn. Mashallah would not even look at the Saturn right just yet. He would look only at the Mars to the Jupiter. But because we're not Mashallah, we're also going to look at the Saturn, and we see that Mars is in the exaltation of Saturn, applying to Saturn, who's in his own sign. Ooh, but guess what? Saturn's retrograde, and Saturn is returning the virtue. But now we've got a decent one, because Saturn is the ruler of the Ascendant. He's close enough. We'll call him in the Ascendant, even though it's about 7 degrees. About 7 degrees. Remember that Bonatti would give 8 degrees for angles, 5 degrees of latitude for the succeeding houses, and 3 degrees of latitude for the Caden houses. So in this case, it is within, and usually like the Ascendant is so strong that planets within like 8 degrees, 7, 8 degrees, I tend to see that they show up. So we're going to go ahead and give Saturn, the ruler of the Ascendant, give him the Ascendant, give him an angular position, in which case that would make this, in this case, it would make it return with fitness. But so there's some returns of virtue in this chart that can make, and also notice that it's the ruler of the Ascendant and the ruler of the second, no, not the second house, but the ruler of not the part of fortune. I thought it was the part of fortune. So Jupiter is the ruler of the part of fortune and the second in this, but it's the planet that kind of ends up screwing around with that. And ninth house, and he rules what else? And the third, oh, that's right, because Jupiter's in Aries. So those are the receptions. Let's see if there's anything else.
Oh, really, really quick, Garth.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, with return of virtue, would that still apply if Saturn, even though Saturn is retrograde, if Saturn is in its own domicile?
Yeah, sure. It
Still
sure.
would.
I mean, especially if Saturn were in the 12th, definitely.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, essentially, combustion and retrogradation are considered the strongest, the worst impediments for a planet. So it'd
I
be
see.
the same thing if the moon or Mercury were applying to this Venus, right? And let's say it were Venus combust in Libra instead, still, it would still be a return of virtue because it's weakened by that. It's weakened by that accident, right? It's weakened by this particular accident, which is what's going on, what's going on with it by bodily conjunction, in this case, the combustion, or this retrogradation. Because once again, what I'm starting to understand about how they saw retrogradation is that they saw it in the same way that they saw angular versus cadent. They saw planets that are angular as constantly in a position of advancement. Their agenda consistently would be able to be advanced, pushed forward, right? If something is advanced, it's moving forward. Whereas if something were in a cadent position, it was called in disregard, well, not disregard, it was called in retreat, right? So, right, if you retreat, that means go back to your original positions, right? If you're facing an army and he says retreat, that means you're fucked. You're not, there's nothing you can do. Go backwards. You're not strong enough to take this army. But if you keep advancing on the other and conquer them, then the empire is yours. And so that was the way that they saw also retrogradation, because they saw retrogradation as a turning back and turning away and unpredictability. And they saw it as planets that were retrograde were unpredictable. They didn't move forward. They didn't advance. They were in the state where they're not in a state of advancement, so they could return to evil. What I tend to see with a lot of planets, my own, because my chart ruler is retrograde. What I tend to see with retrograde planets is that there's something that they should do that they don't, or there's something that's useful that they should be going forward towards that they don't always, that they return back to something that's not so useful. And so it can be in all kinds of ways. Now, this is the ruler of the ascendant, which is the body. So there could be physical issues that Diana doesn't move forward with and doesn't take care of, right? And same thing with the Jupiter. There could be financial issues that there are certain things that I know I should do this and that, but I always kind of find myself falling back into this. That's how the retrograde kind of works. It's a returning to evil. It's a returning back to something, to uselessness, to that which is not useful. So yes, I think it can, because the retrogradation, despite its ability to, despite its competency in its own sign, the retrogradation throws a monkey wrench. So that even though, hey, I'm strong, think about a very rich, powerful person who's barely keeping it together, right? They got it all going on. They're totally rich. They're totally powerful. They've got great job, or they're in a very strong position, important position. Oh, I mean, think of Boris Johnson. That's a good example. Boris Johnson is totally like a retrograde planet. He's got all the power. He's got all the power. He's got all the things in a row, all the ducks in a row, etc. But he's a complete fuck up. You can't expect him to do anything right. He can't even follow. He's a law unto himself. He even trips his own self up. He's not as good as we thought he was. He's in this great position. That's like that, in my opinion. Let's look at Louise. So are there any receptions in the chart? There would be one. There could be one if Venus were later. Okay, so if Venus were later in this chart, she would be applying to the Jupiter. So if Venus, let's say we're at 8 or 9, she would be applying to the Jupiter, and then she would be pushing nature at him because Venus is in the exaltation of Jupiter. But other than this, there are no, it doesn't look like there are any. No, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus. Okay. There is. Sun is at 1810, Mars is at 1813. Okay, so that's actually the closest aspect in this chart. So that is pushing power. So the Sun is pushing power to Mars. Okay, so that is the 8th house pushing power onto the 10th house. So now, or rather, well, yeah, because the Sun rules the 8th and Mars rules the 10th. Now, the 8th house, so Mars, so we've been talking about the 8th house, and we know the 10th house is also mother. So this could have pushed some kind of difficulties onto the mother, right? So right, because the Sun rules the 18th, this could be pushing fears or anxieties onto the mother. Mars is the ruler of the 10th. But it also could be pushing fear and anxiety about whether I'm good enough in my career, right? Because the Sun is what we fear. The Sun is, I mean, the eighth house is what we fear, and the Sun is, do I measure up? Or am I too arrogant? You know, is someone else's arrogance, someone else's arrogance the problem? Is my arrogance the problem? Am I enough? Is the light too bright? Is the light blaring too brightly on me? Am I feeling too scrutinized? This person feels under scrutiny.
But that's, do you mean that's the Mars one? Or is that the Uranus one?
That would be how the Sun to Mars would manifest.
I thought, because you know, when I read my chart, I found the Jupiter, the Jupiter on the no, sorry, I found the Jupiter one quite similar to that. You know, with self-expression and all that.
Oh, I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, you mean the Jupiter in where it would show up in the 10th?
MC, on the MC, yeah, midheaven, yeah.
Yeah, but see, so remember that we can look at 2 different charts and get the same answer with different planets, right? So maybe by whole sign that does make sense. By quadrant, that it looks like this is how that's showing up.
But yeah, I would say, you know, both. You know, I would say both issues that I definitely have had my issues with my mom, and yeah, the other, yeah, I would say that, yeah.
So it would point to, so remember, as I've said before, remember that we tend to, in the modern time, we tend to think about aspects being good or bad, when really they're hard or easy. And sometimes bad things can be made easy. And that's kind of the thing. When we see the ruler of the 8th, a strong ruler of the 8th, I mean, I'm wondering if is your mother still alive? Your mother have any heart issues?
Yeah, she turned 7. Yeah, she's turned 70 last Friday. Yeah.
Does she have heart issues at all?
Heart issues? No. She's very young.
Oh, okay. Good.
No. She had breast cancer 5 years ago, which is quite serious.
I see, but she's fine otherwise. Because I mean, of course, the 8th to but remember, I mean, I'm moving on, but I would have had to kind of look to the derivative houses too. But yes, so what we figured out kind of how the reception was kind of working, and then what my point was that a reception can help a fucked up thing happen, and that we don't always, right? And that's kind of my point. So I'm at Christopher's chart now, and there's the main reception I'm seeing here is between the Moon and Saturn. And also it's nighttime. Yes, it's nighttime. So we've got 2. We've got the Moon that's in Saturn sign it's applying to the Mercury. And the Mercury is, oh, that's interesting. The Mercury, so actually the Mercury is translating Saturn to the Moon. Okay, because what we would have had is if the Mercury were applying to the Saturn, we would have had an example of what Bonatti's his second example was when you have planet A or B in somebody else's sign, and that other planet is also there, right? So, or in somebody else's exaltation. So Mercury here is in its own triplicity, but it's also in the exaltation of Saturn, and Saturn is there. But Mercury is not applying to Saturn. Mercury is retrograde and applying to the Moon, or rather, the Moon is applying to Mercury. So the Mercury is basically translating the Saturn to the Moon, and that's part of the. I think it's one of the reasons I asked about the. It wasn't that made me ask about him being an engineer, but it was the Mercury Saturn with the Saturn exalted that made me think that this guy was an engineer. But now, especially seeing the Mercury is translating to the Moon as well. All of this implies a very kind of deep intelligence, a deep and strong intelligence. So that's kind of the main thing, is we've got both of the indicators for mind involved with this exalted Saturn. So this should be it's basically the intellect that is a very strong talent, that there should be a very strong talent. And notice also that Gemini is rising. So we've got the ruler of the ascendant. Remember, the ascendant and the first house is the head and the mind. And so we've got and Mercury is already the brain. Remember, when we were looking at Mercury, we saw that stuff connected with the head and the brain and the intellect. So part of the karma of this chart is above average intellect. And that's what, and also possibly a little bit too rational, a little bit too much towards rationality. Yeah, look at how the Venus is also in Virgo. The Sun is in Libra. You know, Libra can be codependent without necessarily being highly emotional. But all of these, the Jupiter gives a little bit of that kind of emotional depth in Scorpio there. And the Mars and Sag relationships will bring up high emotions. And so they'll get most of that. What you'll probably find is this chart experiences its highest, its ups and downs emotionally in relationship. That's where, but as far as their own kind of emotional regulation, it will probably be within kind of a narrow range. But it's the intelligence that this reception is really looking at. Okay, let's go.
So would you say there was any kind of reception between the Mars and Sag and the Jupiter and Scorpio?
Oh, thank you. No, that would be called a generosity. So remember, that was that other term that we learned. Thank you. That gives us a visual pictorial example. So this is generosity. And why is it not reception? Because reception really relies on aspect, right? So in order for there to have been a reception between Mars and Jupiter, Mars would need to either be in Cancer or Pisces.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
I had a question, kind of, I think it was around the generosity part, where in the definition it was saying that when you see planets that are in generosity, it leads to surprises. Am I remembering that correctly?
Hold on a second.
I thought that was somewhat intriguing.
Hold on a second, because it did say some of that, didn't it? Okay, wait. It was under reception, wasn't it? If the testimony of the significator were from the category of pushing nature, oh no, that's from pushing nature. Okay. Here it is. If however, were of the category of generosity, it signifies the querent and sought thing are esteeming each other. No. So it's esteem. What was the thing that you thought? Oh, no, it was the mutual reception to the other. It signifies the appearance of an unexpected thing. So it was mutual reception. Whereas in this chart, we're looking at generosity. So this is generosity. So the generosity would be the two things are esteeming each other. So the 6th house and the 7th house. Now remember, the 6th house is domesticated animals, and the 7th house. So that could mean that you know, you get a dog when you get married, or you're married, your partner loves animals, or something like that. It could mean something.
My 5 acres are quickly filling up with animals, so it's
Ah,
happening in
there we
real
go.
time.
Okay. All right. So there we are. Right. Okay. Okay. So there. Okay. Right. So in Jupiter. Right. So Jupiter increasing and Mars and Jupiter. All right. So the Jupiter increase and the Mars. Yeah. So it's good to know that there's other things we can look at for the 6th house besides illness, like animals. And that's something like, especially domesticated animals that we love, like dogs and cats and things of that nature. And goats and chickens and all that other kind of stuff, which your land may be. If you're getting cattle and horses, then that's the 12th house. But yeah, good question, Diane. Thank you. And wait, and did I answer your question, Christopher?
Yeah, you answered my question, but I still am kind of curious what it meant by surprises.
Oh, well, I mean, who knows? Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm gonna be able to tell you what it means.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, a surprise is a surprise. All right, here we have Manuele. Okay, let's see if we got any receptions going on here. So we got that square to. Okay, what we do, we almost had one here with the Mars applying when Mars, if Mars had been at 15, if Mars had been at 15 instead of 16, then Mars would be applying to Saturn and there would be pushing nature. Let's see, what else do we have? Venus, okay, here we have one. Mercury to Saturn. Mercury is in Aquarius, which is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is in square. Mercury is applying to the Saturn. Mercury is pushing nature to the Saturn. So by management, we've already got, let's see, Mercury is the ruler of not the 6th, the 8th, and the 11th. So Mercury is the ruler of the 11th, which we know can be friends, but also future wishes and hopes. And then Saturn is the ruler of, Saturn's in the 12th, ruling the 3rd and the 4th. So Mercury is pushing the 11th and the 8th to the 3rd and the 4th. Now that could be problems for the sibling, right? Because Saturn is the ruler of the 3rd, and so Mercury would rule the 6th from the 3rd. So there could be illnesses. There could be problems with the legs or veins or skin or bones for the sibling. There could be, let's see, and the other one is the 8, 9. So the other is the 9th from it. It could also, they could also have a sibling that is an engineer, or that went for it because Mercury, Saturn, or they themselves might be an engineer because Mercury, Saturn, or they might be someone who's a researcher or does some kind of researching about subjects, hidden subjects. Do you do anything like that, Manuela? Or maybe she's not with us. But so we've been talking already about the 4th house, the 8th house, the 12th. Notice that the moon's the ruler of the 8th. It's in the sign of Mercury, who's there on the cusp of the 4th. The sun and Saturn's on the cusp is in the 12th. So 4, 8, and 12 all have to do with things that are hidden. So this person may be doing research into things that are hidden. Certainly, she's here with me, and she's researching into, and also Saturn is old things, right? She's interested in these older kinds of things. Was that her? Oh, an estrangement between her and the brother. Is it an older brother? Right? And look at how the Mars is with the Saturn. So the Mars, remember that Mars is the universal ruler for brothers. Younger, okay? And so Mars is the universal ruler for brothers. And so this would be a square to both, right? This is a Mars-Saturn square, a Mars-Saturn conjunction. So the Mercury would be squaring both. So that definitely fits enmity or some kind of difficulty with the brother and the Mars-Saturn together. I wonder, does the brother have issues with depression or mental issues? A whole family, and veins. Okay, so there are issues with veins. The whole family has issue with veins. Whole family, the paternity, 4th house, whole family has issue with the veins. It looks like this brother's gone through some stuff. I wonder if the brother's been in jail. Has the brother been in jail? Has depression. right? So this is how, now it looks like one of these days, not in jail. Okay, thank you. It looks like one of these days we're going to need to look at derivative houses and how to read about other people in your chart. Like basically what I just kind of did was read based on the third house as the ascendant for the brother in this chart. And able to kind of get, some few things, but interesting that I missed I should have gotten that, especially brother is Mars. There's the square from the Mercury to Mars as well. Mars is with the ruler of the third. So I should have gotten that there was some kind of contention, but see how that can show. Now here, remember what they say is there should be something decent with, in this particular case, there should be something useful with this square, right? Mercury, did your brother teach you anything? Did you learn anything useful from your brother before you and he became, because because the Mercury is applying to the Saturn, right? And it's from its own sign. So it's saying, hey, there's reception here. So, or maybe it was that you gave up on the brother before he gave up on you, or like you turned away from the brother first and the brother still loved you, or maybe the brother still does love you but you don't really want to be around them, because if it's Saturn, if the ruler of the third is doing the receiving, then that would imply that the brother is receiving the Mercury. Although Mercury, once again, doesn't necessarily represent you. You're represented by Mars. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, how funny, because it's late Scorpio rising. Very interesting. Oh, I mean, welcome to astrology. Yeah, I'm happy to stop talking about the brother anyway. But interesting that the ruler of the first and the ruler of the third are together in this chart. And in the 12th. So there's already, and Mars, Saturn are what we call the anger frustration axis. So those things are going to come up. And also ways to, issues around how to get him on the straight and narrow, get him onto a better path. But those are kind of issues. But see, now what we see then is that the Mercury pointed to what was going on as opposed to, like, I didn't really use Mercury necessarily for the intellect, but this is obviously also a very intelligent person, or once again, not that nobody here is intelligent. I tend to attract really very intelligent and scholastically minded people, people who are rigorous scholastically. But the Mercury Saturn is known for being able to deal with difficult subjects, with things that are particularly ponderous and heavy, things that are particularly difficult to decipher, things that are hard work to get through. And so that's why the Mercury Saturn tends to represent, often can represent, now this is a different kind of intelligence than the intelligence we saw with Christopher. This one's much more interested in what's hidden, what's not seen, and really very research oriented, this chart as well. So I think that's really maybe how the Mercury is showing itself as far as this person's intelligence. Manuela, do you do research of any kind, or are you involved with research? Totally. Okay, right. So pretty much, I'm sure all the things that I just said, and also with the Mercury, the Moon and Mercury in Virgo, and studying astrology as well. I would think that she probably studies more than just astrology, as far as you might be involved in other kinds of esoteric or occult type things as well. Anything that's hidden. This person would love the hidden, right? We've got the Mercury on the 4th. Mercury is the ruler of the 8th. So the 4th house is the hidden and the secret. The 8th house is the underworld. Then we've got the ruler of the ascendant in the 12th, right? So this person loves things that are hidden and hidden from view. Arts, tarot, family systems. Yeah. So family systems are all about what's hidden, right? All about the mysteries and the secrets, the family secrets as well. Yeah, so that fits kind of perfectly. Okay, so what I can do is you all can ask me more questions. I can put up more charts. We can do whatever. What do you want? What would you like to do?
Be down to look at more charts.
I got one.
What's that?
It's Roberto Alagna. He's got a quite interesting chart.
Whose chart?
Roberto Alagna, the opera singer.
Oh, Roberto Alagna?
Yeah, he's got an interesting chart.
let's see if we have, if I have him.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have him, but I've got Pavarotti here.
Oh yeah, yeah, cool.
Oh, I should hold on one second. Manuela just asked me a question about the Jupiter Saturn. No, because it's not close enough. It would be. So she was asking if I thought the Jupiter Saturn was a reception. Jupiter is not close enough. 4.5, 9. Yeah, so it's almost close enough. When Jupiter got to 7, it would be, when Jupiter gets to 7, it would be close enough to be, but yes, it would be until, and also, it would be, if Mars were at 3 or 4 degrees, then Mars would be pushing, he would be pushing nature. Okay, now here's the thing. Mars is in his own sign, right? So if Mars were at 4 degrees of Scorpio, then he would be pushing, power at Jupiter, and he would also be receiving Jupiter from his exaltation. When Jupiter gets to 7 degrees, he will then be moving within the orb, of application to Saturn, in which case he will be pushing nature to Saturn. So it's only because he wasn't close enough that I didn't consider it to be. Good question. Okay, here's Luciano Pavarotti. And I think that there is this one, Moon to Mars. Moon is at 15 degrees of Aries and Mars is at 17 Sagittarius. And I was telling people that, you're welcome. I was telling people that I see this term of Mars, or this term of Sagittarius. This is the Mars term, I think it is. No, it's the Mercury term. This is the Mercury term of Sagittarius. Mercury owns this term, and you see it a lot in people that need to be able to make themselves understood in different languages. You see it a lot in opera singers' charts. Placido Domingo has a planet in this term. I think I've got Leontine Price here too, so we'll see if she's got a planet in this term. Ella might even, quite a few people that are, especially people that do international singing, like opera singing, you'll see this term kind of showing up. But yeah, so and also note that the Mars is the Mars is in the 5th house of entertainment as well. And he would be, let's see, he's ruling the 9th house. So one of the things, so the 9th house is the house of knowledge in traditional astrology. And one of the things that people kind of overlook about Luciano Pavarotti is that Luciano Pavarotti is not just one of the greatest voices, but he's one of the greatest vocal technicians. He is the great, as a tenor is concerned, he is the greatest vocal technician of his time. And so knowledge, there's one of my favorite opera singers, Zinka Milanov, says, when you're young, you sing on youth. And when you become older, you must sing on knowledge. And Pavarotti is really a singer who sang on knowledge. I didn't even think about that until seeing this. But not only did he have this amazingly glorious voice, but also one of the most solid vocal techniques in the entire in the business. And for years, I mean, let's see, he starts like in 61 or 62, he becomes world famous in 81, right? So he's already been singing 20 years, and he's starting to do bigger and bigger things, and continues singing up until what, 96, 97, 2000, he does that Otello, so just kind of the solidity and the solidity and stolidity of the technique. And notice how the Venus is in the 1st house, but first of all, in Virgo, which is a sign of attractive voice. But Virgo is also about technical issues and refinement and and perfectionism. And so, he wasn't like the greatest musician, but as far as voice was concerned, there was no one else who really sang better on knowledge, used their knowledge to sing well. He didn't just coast on his beautiful voice. And so I think that that's a really interesting aspect of this kind of 9th house as the house of knowledge kind of thing. And Mars also rules the 4th house. So there maybe and look at how the Jupiter is in there. So there probably is some kind of good relationship with the father. Might be also a good relationship with the father. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh, note also, here's the same kind of thing. So note that the moon is applying to the opposition to the sun. This is a full moon chart. And the sun is 1 minute earlier than Mars. So this is 2 types, because because the sun is the exaltation ruler of Aries. So in this case, the moon is pushing nature at the sun, and she'll be finished with him, and in a minute she'll push nature at Mars. And so she's the ruler of the 12th. That's interesting, because the 12th house is the house of self-undoing. And certainly some of it, and we know also that the moon is appetite. And there's a great story about a woman who was a dresser who got called into this is after he got really, really famous. She got called into his dressing room to help him in the middle, during intermission or something. And she walks in, and he's naked on this couch with 2 women. One's holding up his stomach, and the other one's giving him a blowjob. So definitely, the moon has got its little foibles, and it maybe so that could be part of something. We also know that people that worked with him up until he got really famous said that he got really insufferable and difficult after he got famous, and so that makes sense with the sun opposition as well. He got really kind of hyped up on his own fame. So that's another interesting chart with interesting receptions. And then let's look at Leontine. So I think we have one with, okay, so here we've got another situation where now this is actually called something else, but I don't really think that there's much to it in my opinion. It's called pushing to nature. So if Venus were at 4, let's say Venus were at 4 degrees here, then Venus would be what we call pushing to nature, because she's in her own exaltation, but she's also applying to a planet whose domicile it is. And this is actually what Bonatti was alluding to when he gave that example of Jupiter in Aries and Mars that's also there who's applying to him. That Jupiter then takes on not only the triplicity rulership, but takes on the exaltation. In this case, even though she's not applying, we can definitely say that she's taken on both the exaltation and the domicile, and same thing with Jupiter, that he will have taken on the domicile and the exaltation. But there is a pushing nature thing going on here. Jupiter or pushing power thing. Jupiter is pushing power at Saturn, who is the ruler of the ascendant. So Jupiter is at 5 degrees of Pisces. Saturn is at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. So Jupiter is now if Jupiter didn't have to be there. If Jupiter were, let's say if Jupiter had been here, there would have been a mutual reception. Or if Jupiter had been here in Aries, there would have been a trine, and it would have been a trine with reception. But in this case, we've got Jupiter pushing power at Saturn, and then also receiving Saturn from his domicile. So that's super strong. And then, as I've already been saying, I think that any planet that is with or in its own sign or exaltation is in a place of a position of largesse and can do almost anything. There are quite a few not receptions, but applications. Jupiter is applying to Saturn. Mercury is applying to Jupiter. The moon is applying to Venus. The sun is applying to Mars. Almost every classical, matter of fact, every classical planet in the chart is involved in an application. However, there really is only one classical reception happening, and that's between Jupiter, well, 2, right? Because Mercury is pushing nature at Jupiter, right? So there's 2. Mercury is pushing nature at Jupiter, and Jupiter is pushing power at Saturn and receiving Saturn. And then all of the rest. So for instance, this Sun-Mars square has no reception. So we wouldn't expect that particular aspect to be, what shall we say, very useful or very workable, or to work so well. This square would carry the full weight of, shall we say, this would carry the full weight of its difficulty. And sure enough, it's the ruler of the 7th and the ruler of the 10th. And she was married, and she was married to a person she was working with. So she was in a very famous version of Porgy and Bess that went all over the world in the early 50s. And her husband, William Warfield, sang Porgy. So she sang Bess and he sang Porgy. So they did not continue. I don't think it lasted very long after Porgy and Bess. And then she didn't marry again. So we even can see here how the career vied, the marriage and career vied. And the part of the problem in the relationship was that her career was moving on and his was stalling. So we've even got how, and so we've got kind of how marriage didn't necessarily work. No children in this chart, no children for this person. Marriage didn't really work out. Instead, they had this kind of illustrious career, this really illustrious career. So I think that's, here we can see the difference between maybe how this Jupiter Saturn, right? Saturn is the ruler of the ascendant, right? And Jupiter is the ruler of the 2nd, which is the voice, right? And it's with Venus. This person has one of the most beautiful voices that ever kind of hit a stage. So we can see how this square may provide industry and work for the voice, industry around the voice, but this square denies marriage as a result of work and career, right? So it's completely different. So now that was a great example of a chart that gives us, and then we also see this one, the moon applying to Venus. Now the moon's applying to Venus, and there's no real reception between them, but as I said, Venus is exalted, so it's going to help. She's going to help out Venus, and so this person their career was music, right? And also this was one of those charts where they talked about a planet that was recently out from under the rays of the sun, no more than 20 degrees, and the moon was making its application to it. That planet would be the planet that represented the person's profession. And this is exact. Venus is 20 degrees away out of the beams of the sun. The moon's next application is to her. So this person is a musician, a singer, and in the 2nd house. And look, remember, Mercury rules the voice. Jupiter is the ruler of the 2nd house, rules the voice. Venus is the ruler of the 2nd house by exaltation, ruling the voice. So interesting. Hitler. So there's that Saturn in Leo that I was talking about, that misanthropic Saturn in Leo, and the fact that in this particular case, the Venus. Okay, I see what's going on. All right. So in this case, the Venus Mars, the Venus could have been they could have been applying to the Saturn, but they're not. So what is? Moon is applying to Jupiter. Now here's a place where this is a negative reception, where the moon is giving fall to Jupiter. Now Jupiter is mercy, Jupiter is compassion, Jupiter is peace, Jupiter is virtue, right? So the moon is giving its fall, giving Jupiter's fall to him. The fall is ruled by Saturn. I've been talking about this Saturn in Leo being misanthropic in many different ways. And note how now the ruler of the ascendant it's a Libra rising. The ruler of the ascendant is this Venus, who is this Venus who's retrograde. Venus is retrograding to Mars. She's about to go 100% exact. So she's pushing power onto Mars. Mars is the ruler of the 7th. 7th house is a natural house for war. Mars is the war god. Right? Remember that Hitler considered himself an artist, but he was really a warmongering coward. And we also know, remember, we've been seeing Mars and Taurus and boxers and martial artists charts. So the overcompensation of masculinity. And once Venus were to go past the Mars, she would be in besiegement. She would be besieged between Mars and Saturn, and she would be pushing power rather at Saturn. So oh, here, Christopher, so here's another example of a planet that's in its own sign, but it's retrograde. But then it's also involved in these negative aspects too, right? So a planet of Libra rising with the Venus in Taurus, we wouldn't expect necessarily to be necessarily be a bad thing, but we've seen two charts with Venus and with Libra rising and Venus in Taurus of monsters, and one of them is Adolf Hitler, and the other one is Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer. So we've definitely seen it, but that was when Venus was right on the cusp of the eighth. And we know that love drove him to, or his warped concept of love, rather, drove him to whatever else he was doing. Are there any other receptions? Doesn't look like it. Sun at 0. Oh, so the sun's applying to Jupiter. As a matter of fact, the moon, as a matter of fact, now here's an example. It's not really a good one. So Bonatti in the 146 considerations, I remember Leila and I, and maybe Diana was with us too, but Leila and I were looking at this one passage where Bonatti was saying, hey, you know what? The moon doesn't just translate anyone to anybody to anybody, because she only translates a planet who's in its own dignity to a planet, to another planet who's in its own dignity or in her dignity. So for instance, she can take the disposition of the sun, right? Remember, she's the mediatrix, she's the transmitter, she's the main transmitter. So whereas all of the planets, so whereas like Venus will translate the light of any planet to any planet, the moon takes on dispositions based on whether or not the planet is in a sign that she deals with, or they're in a good sign for themselves. And then she'll only give it to a planet who is in some kind of dignity or in her dignity, for instance. So the moon she just left the sun, the trine of the sun, where the sun gave her exaltation. So she took that on. Now you would think that she would then translate the sun's light to Jupiter, but Jupiter is in his own fall and in her detriment. So based on Bonatti, he says no, she wouldn't give it to Jupiter. She'd wait until she was able to give it to Venus, not even to Mars, because even though Mars is in her exaltation, he's in detriment. She'd wait and give it to Venus, who's in her own sign, who is in Venus's own sign and in the moon's exaltation. Now, I don't know how I feel about that, but I found that it was interesting that he was making such a specific, and he did it more than once, in more than one place, that he was making such a specific issue about it. But no, so there aren't really any, well, actually, when the moon was at 0, then this was a trine with reception between the moon and the sun. Questions? Oh, here's Ted Bundy, another serial killer. So this one was here between, and my client yesterday just asked me about this. She was like, hey, what were you talking about with the sun on the part of fortune? You were looking at Ted Bundy. And I was like, well, I do remember looking at Ted Bundy and the Saturn on the part of fortune. And she was like, because my daughter has that. And she's like, I'm like, no, I'm sure I didn't say anytime Saturn's on the part of fortune, it's a serial killer. What I was saying was that Saturn in Leo is misanthropic based on this feeling of superiority. And look at how we have the sun applying to the Saturn here. And the sun's the ruler of the ascendant. And the sun is also the ruler of the part of fortune. So already there's already kind of a being, what's the word I'm looking for? There's already kind of an inclination towards antipathy to other people, towards misanthropy. Then look at how we've got this triple conjunction in, well, not really a triple conjunction, but we've got this system in Scorpio, and we've got the moon with Mars, right? And we've got generosity between Mars and Jupiter. And look at how Jupiter is the ruler of the 8th and Mars is the ruler of the 9th. And Jupiter is the ruler of the 5th and Mars is the ruler of the 4th. So that's connecting the 4th and the 5th. It's really connecting the 4th and the 5th. So what I like, what I enjoy and what I do in secret, what's done in secret and what I enjoy. So, and then we've got this Mercury Moon. Oh, that's already. Well, we've got the Mercury applying to the Venus because the Mercury is retrograde at a higher degree, but there is no reception. So the reception in this chart is really between the Sun and the Saturn itself being on the ascendant. We're not on the ascendant, but on the part of fortune. And this is relatively close to Regulus. And remember that Regulus has the nature of Mars and Saturn. Here's the moon with Mars. Here's the sun with Saturn. And here's Mercury and Venus and Jupiter, all in the signs of Mars. So in the Jeffrey Dahmer chart, we had moon in Aries and moon and Mars in Aries. And here we've got moon and Mars, but once again, fire signs, so choleric. And we've got cholera with the sun in choleric signs. We've got the Saturn in the choleric signs. We've got the moon and Mars in the choleric signs as well. Michelangelo. Doesn't look like I see any. Doesn't even, this might not even have any applications. Look at this. Look at this illustrious chart with no applications. Am I right? Jupiter at 3, Mercury at 28, Moon at 2. The next application the Moon will make would be to the trine of Saturn at 16. It's too far. She's not applying to anybody. Sun is separated from Mars. Venus is, Mercury has separated from Venus. How interesting. So there are no receptions in this chart because it's full of nothing but separations. So we know, now we know something. Now I just learned something. Oh wait, there is one application. Venus to the ascendant. That's the Venus and the Sun to the ascendant. That's it. But don't ask me too much about that. That's the only thing. But it's not strong enough to really. It's not strong enough to be a planetary thing, but strong enough to be an artist, right? Strong enough to show an artist. Venus trine to that, and then Venus's exaltation. These planets are in Venus's exaltation, and the Sun is applying to that as well. And he worked for churches, which is the Sun. Interesting. What is it? So Virgo is the church. Huh. Interesting. Saturn is the ruler of the part of fortune. Now, Saturn is the ruler of the part of fortune and applying to it. Interesting. All right. So the thing that we learned with this chart is that it doesn't matter if there are no applying aspects in the chart. You can be a historical figure with no applying aspects in your chart. I wouldn't have expected this. Look at this. Not one applying aspect. Zero, zilch, nothing, nada. Except, like I said, to the ascendant. But that's it. Just the aspects to the ascendant, not even the moon.
Would you say then that perhaps aspects to the ascendant is more powerful than applying aspects?
No. No, I wouldn't. What I would say is, what we know about Michelangelo is that he was a very, very difficult character. He was kind of a tortured person. He was very difficult to get along with. He was very difficult to work with and work for. He think of how long it took him. Well, I mean, it's not his fault, but think how long it took for for St. Peter's to get finished. He didn't finish it until he was like in his 80s. Michelangelo is kind of a force of nature kind of character that I don't think anybody could really get along with or deal with well. I know that the popes that dealt with him had a lot of problems with them. Of course, who cares, right? Fuck the popes. But I also know the people that worked with him, he was very difficult to deal with and to work under. So maybe that has maybe there is an aspect to the and a scatteredness and an obsessiveness. So those could be some of the aspects that bring out the separation, the fact that everything is separated, that there's nothing going to anything. Also, remember that he, on some level, maybe this could work then, but not now, because there was nothing for an artist but patronage, right? You basically you worked as an artist because you had patrons, and so if you didn't have any patrons, you didn't work as an artist. You weren't actually able to do anything. So the patron basically defined everything that you did. Like your talent is one thing, but the patron actually defined how the whole world went for you and what kind of jobs you did and what the subject matter was on, etc. And that was actually part of the problem that Michelangelo had. I mean, Sistine Chapel, there was all this arguing about him not wanting people to see it, and what are you doing, and why is it taking so long? And I didn't want this, I wanted something different. And you see, so I wonder if that is how the proliferation of separations is applying or showing themselves, is in this this kind of unruly character that needed to be completely molded, needed to be completely kind of guided by something specific, by a specific thing. Like maybe if he had been left to his own devices, he might have created great pieces that never got seen, or he might have, or maybe not even worked his talent to the same extent, or found himself just obsessing on things that weren't of any use. But because of the patronage system and him being recognized, you know, by the papacy, essentially, his life was set, kind of in the same way that Haydn's life was set, and that Mozart's wasn't, and that Beethoven's wasn't, because not having a patron. So maybe this is the kind of chart that can work in a system of patronage, but maybe in today's life might not be able to work. I don't know. I mean, it's pure speculation, but I don't think that implies that that aspects to the ascendant are as strong as aspects to a planet, or stronger. Okay, so what did we get from today? This was kind of a gnarly, a little bit of a gnarly subject. Diana, what did we get from today?
It's just really good practice looking at all those different little technical differences in the reception and the, I mean, I'm still wrapping my head around that whole subject. So I love going through the charts and having you kind of explain this and that and the other. Someday I'll have those all down, but
at your own time, at your own time and pace.
yeah.
But this is really, I mean, the thing is, once again, it's been lost. First of all, this is lost subject matter for the most part, right? Almost nobody is really using it extensively. I mean, you know, Chris Brennan might be, or some of these other medievalists are I'm sure are using it. But as far as this being like a widespread technique that we know about, and that, I mean, this is something that I think is important. I mean, even for instance, when we were looking at the Leontyne Price chart and looking at the difference between the Jupiter-Saturn square and the Sun-Mars square, right? And my whole thesis around this particular area is that maybe this can show us which ones are the malefic squares and which one are the benefic squares. And that chart seemed to bear that up, you know, so that was kind of interesting for me.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
All right, Louise, what about you?
Hi. I would say the same as Dan or Diana. I find it, I can't wrap my head around when it's actually in reception and when it's just you know, not just
A regular
pushing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or pushing. Oh, so because those are three.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Exactly. Yeah. While you were talking, I found you know, the copy for the Bernardi from the first Bernardi book you sent out, the considerations. I found something there, so I might have to read it again and see this this taping again as well.
I mean, like I said, we're kind of uncovering it. And you know, and it is gnarly. It is murky. You know, there is a murkiness to it. And so, but it's worth looking at. And it's, like I said, and especially, you know, okay, so as you said, figuring out what is reception, what is pushing, and what is just a regular aspect, right?
Exactly.
Those are the three important. And so really, what is commitment of disposition, right? That's how we started the whole fucking thing, right? So what are all these, right? So what are all these things? So when we saw, I'm going to actually go back to Langston Price for a second, because that gives us a good example of two squares that are different. So in order for there to be reception, a planet, two planets have to be in aspect, and either planet A must be in the sign of planet B, or planet B must be in the sign of planet A, or planet A must be in its own sign or exaltation and be applying. Okay, so that's
as you started out with.
Yeah,
the first slide.
Okay, so planet A, so in this case, planet A is Jupiter.
Yeah.
Planet B is Saturn. Planet A is in his own sign and applying to Saturn, who's also in his sign. So that means that planet A is pushing power, right? If a planet is in his own sign or exaltation and applying to another planet, that planet is pushing power, right? And think of it as planet A is powerful, right? Planet A, excuse me, planet A is in his own sign and thus is powerful. So when he applies to another planet, he pushes his power at them. Now, here we have another type of reception. Planet A is in Pisces, which is the sign of Jupiter, and it's applying to Jupiter. So this planet is pushing nature at Jupiter. So here are the two types of pushing. Mercury pushes nature at Jupiter because Mercury, planet A, is in Jupiter's sign. Jupiter, however, pushes power at Saturn because Jupiter is in his own sign and applying to Saturn. Our next application in the chart is between Sun and Mars. The Sun is in Aquarius applying to Mars in Taurus. There is no reception between these two because the Sun is in the sign of Saturn and Mars is in the sign of Venus, right? So in order for there to be reception, the planet A has to be in the domicile or exaltation or planet B, or planet B has to be in the domicile or exaltation of planet A, or planet A has to be in its own domicile or exaltation. None of those things is happening there. This is a regular aspect. This is a regular square. So we've got a conjunction where Mercury is pushing nature at Jupiter by conjunction. Jupiter is pushing power at Saturn by square. And then the Sun and Saturn are squaring each other. And Moon and Venus are squaring each other. So this chart gives us all of the examples. So if if it's just a regular old square, then there's not going to be any exchange of signs. There's not going to be any kind of connection between the signs. It's just going to be straight up. It's just going to be straight up. I wanted to show Holistic Star again because her chart was so good for it too. Okay, so as I said, here we've got a perfect example of pushing nature. The Sun is in Capricorn at 14 and applying to the sextile of Saturn at 19 Pisces. The Sun is in Saturn's sign and applying, thus it is pushing nature onto Saturn by sextile. By contrast, the Moon is in her own sign and making her powerful. When planets are powerful, they push power when they apply. So that's the way to think about it. When a planet is powerful, it pushes power when it applies all these tongue twisters. And so here the moon is applying to Saturn by trine. So she's pushing power at Saturn by trine. And then do we have anything that's just a regular old aspect? Yeah, we've got the sun applying to Mars. Well, it's a little far, but the sun is, oh no, but no, it's not just a regular old, because the sun would be pushing nature to Mars because the sun is in Mars's exaltation. So almost everything in here, almost all of these planets involve some kind of pushing nature. Even here with the sun, and this is also a full what I call a full moon chart. So that's the way to look at it. What I would do, Anne-Louise, is I would download Leontine Price's chart and work with it that way. So I would work with her chart because it's got all of the examples. Oh, good, makes sense, good, because it's got all the examples in there, and nice and laid up. Hey, Christopher, what did you get from today?
I found that the concept of pushing management pretty interesting. I mean, I know always working with, you know, house and sign rulerships and so on, but just thinking about the houses pushing into one another is something I haven't really thought of or come across. So, yeah.
And it makes so much sense, doesn't it, really? Because that is what's going on. You know, that is what's happening. And so, and especially when we look at it in relation to return of virtue, one of the things I'm noticing is that return of virtue always shows up after reception in books.
Mm-hmm.
So it's connected. There's a connection between it because, of course, one's committing the virtue and the other is rejecting the virtue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Manuela, what about you? I know you sometimes have microphone issues. Let's see, I learned that I have to study aspects of this and receptions more, pushing nature, pushing. I know, right? These are huge. These are really, yeah, it really is. And this is really not just an area of study, but an area of experimentation for us, as far as I'm concerned. I'm completely committed to working with it. Yeah, the Leontine Price. If you want the Leontine Price chart, I can send. Let's see, I can send it to you, or I can. What I can do is I'll put her details in the chat, and you can work with it that way. But yes, you're absolutely right. That it is a difficult thing. So she's February 10, 1927. Laurel, Mississippi. I know that. Laurel, 6:15 a.m. Laurel, Mississippi. Okay, there's the Leontine Price information. February 10, 1927, 6:15 a.m. Laurel, Mississippi, United States. So that's a really useful chart for. As a matter of fact, and Manuela, I would do the same thing. I'd go ahead and get that chart down and look at it in respect with all the things that we've just been talking about, because I think that's a really useful one. But yeah, all of that stuff, pushing nature, pushing power, pushing management, like Christopher mentioned, because remember, pushing management is always happening, no matter what. So even when there's no reception. So, hey, for instance, let me just bring up Leontine one more time. Because what we did when we looked at the Sun-Mars, when we looked at the Sun-Mars connection, we were looking purely at pushing management. There was no connection of reception. So what did I say? Oh, it's the ruler of the 7th squaring the ruler of the 10th. And it's just a regular old square, which means it's going to be problematic. And sure enough, she was married once. It didn't really work out. The career always took over. She never married again. She never had children. Bam. So that's how the pushing management works. And that's also why, if you remember when he talked about pushing management, what he said was, hey, if it happens by square, bam. If it happens by such and such, bam. If it happens by such and such, bam. Right? So it's all of that kind of stuff. If it happens in these particular ways, here we are. Okay. Which, if it were, okay, however, the pushing of arrangement or management is if a planet would be joined to a planet in whatever way the conjunction was, and it would push its own arrangement to it. We know that the arrangement is by house rulership, which if it were from the sextile to the trine aspect, and there were reception, the pushing itself will be with concord. So we know that that's not the case in this chart. We know that what's going on in this chart is actually the fact that there's the sun, but if it were from a conjunction and there were a complexion between them, it will be even concord, right? And if it were to the contrary of what we have said, the pushing of arrangement will be without concord. It's the opposite of what he said, right? It's the contrary. It's not by trine or sextile with reception. It's not in a conjunction where both planets are in the same sign and there's they're sharing a complexion. It's a square without reception. Thus, the arrangement is being pushed without concord. And I think that's a really important way to be looking at pushing management versus reception, and versus the other ways or other styles of reception. Because pushing management is just, oh, hey, the ruler of the something is doing this to the ruler of that, which means, oh, when those two areas of life come together, they're either going to come together by trine, it's going to be nice, they're going to come together in reception, or they're going to come together by square with no reception, it's going to suck.
Yeah, it's like so clarifying in terms of interpretive technique when you're talking with folks.
I agree. I completely agree. And it's once again, and it's something to be pursuing for evidence, because the evidence is, does that mean that square that doesn't have the reception is really more malefic? It looks like it in this chart. It looks like it in that fucking chart. So it's really something to be paying attention to. So if you can do anything, have memorized 100% who owns and who is exalted in what sign, so that whenever you look at a chart, you see, oh, Mercury's in Gemini, Mercury's in Aries. Oh, Mars is sign. Oh, where's Mars? Oh, look, they're applying. Oh, wow, Mars. You see, the minute you see that, then you know, oh, there's the reception. Right? That's how you know. Once again, remember, thanks to Chris, we got the general idea of what reception is, which is, or Christopher rather, which is, it's a network of associations based on essential dignity. So that's what we're looking for. So we need to be 100% strong in our knowledge of the essential dignities, so that whenever we look at the chart, we can immediately go right to what's receiving and what isn't. Because in that chart, there's lots of stuff that's receiving each other, and then there's lots of stuff that isn't at all. And so, Christopher, here's an interesting thing. We looked at Michelangelo, who's definitely like one of the historic figures of the ages, right? Lincoln Price is certainly one of the historic figures of the 20th century, and it's looking like her reputation is still kind of continuing on past her. It's already, she's been retired already for almost 30 years, 40 years, almost 50 years she's been retired. So she's still also, but she's got all those applications, right? So it's just fascinating what the difference between that as far as application and separation. I think that I definitely would have thought that a chart can't really succeed if it doesn't have any applications in it, but obviously that's not the case. So fascinating. All right, you guys, if that's it, any other questions on anything? You can ask me anything now. Any kind of clarification, or we can just end it.
I'm just